Hey, everybody, welcome back to Getting in a College Coach Conversation. We've got a couple of segments here remaining today, but our first segment, Shannon, I'm sorry you missed it. It was great. We talked with the VP of Enrollment at not Santa Fe, St. John's College, which is in Santa Fe and Annapolis,
Yep.
two campuses. And he was great. We talked all about the college search for LGBTQ plus students, and it's a great segment. People should go and check that out, especially because it's Pride Month. So a good one. You are here because it's time again for us to engage with our listener questions. For those listeners who maybe are just finding the podcast, can you remind them some of the ways that they can send us questions so that we can answer them on these future segments?
You can find us just about everywhere. You can send questions through our website. You'll find a little submission form. If you look at the podcast on our website, you can submit them to us through Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and any place on social media, with the exception of TikTok. Not yet, until I can teach Ian those dance moves.
No way.
But anywhere else, look for College Coach on social media, and you can leave a comment. You can send a private message. We take questions from anyone, anywhere, and we'll answer them.
Hey, that's right. And if you find Shannon at an ice cream shop in Massachusetts, or find me at a hipster coffee shop here in Portland, go ahead and grab us by the sleeve and tell us what you'd like us to ask on the show, and we'll answer your question in front of all of the listeners of Getting It.
Yes, it's pretty easy to find us.
That's our natural habitat, I think. Yeah, for those that don't know. All right, Shannon, we've got some admissions questions, I think, to start with, and I'm gonna kick it over to you.
All righty. The first question came in actually through our Instagram page anonymously. And just to throw that out to listeners, if you don't specify otherwise, we'll often throw your first name out there, but we have absolutely no problem with asking the question anonymously. So feel free to do that. If you can message us and we see your Instagram handle, but just say, hey, can you ask this anonymously? No problem at all. So this person asked, regarding students with mental health issues that affect grades and rigor choices, is there a limit to what should be disclosed as a struggle in an application? For example, OCD has kind of a positive layperson connotation versus a mood disorder, which is harder to overcome and could present more social challenges once in a college community. What about kids who struggle in the middle of the high school post-pandemic and don't have the more favorable upwards arch story of those who are recovered by junior year?
Yeah, I think this is a really complicated question. And I think that there are also, I'm not a psychologist, right? But there are degrees of intensity with a particular affliction, right? You could have OCD that is in fairly small doses and, constrains you in certain respects. And you could have OCD that is really debilitating. I think the same thing's true for mood disorders or anxiety, right? It can be a small thing that you're grappling with. It can also somewhat take over depending on what else is happening in your life. And so what's really important to understand is that the college application doesn't include a lot of space for nuance and understanding these kinds of things. And so whenever a student volunteers information about a challenge that they've had, there's not that space to go into 10 pages about the ins and outs of when it strikes and what kind of strategies they've developed and the conversations they've had with a therapist or with a psychologist in order to support them. And so you have to be really careful. One of the pieces of advice that I will give to students is you never want to raise questions in an application that are unanswered by the materials of the application. If you raise a question that an admission officer says, wait a second, what is this? And how is the student working on this? And then you move on to another topic. That can be quite concerning. Now, there is a legal requirement, right? That if you have a disability of any kind, that can't be used as a reason not to admit you to a college. But colleges are so selective that there are many different reasons wrapped up in why you might receive a denial letter. And I think this is really strange and hard for us, Shannon, because when we talk with students, we get to develop a really great long-term relationship with them and get to understand some of the ins and outs and some of the challenges that they have experienced. And as counselors, we want to encourage students to tell their story and to say what they've been struggling with and to feel like that's not something they need to hide behind.
Yeah.
But as an admission officer who reads a file in 10 to 15 minutes, they don't have that same sort of investment in that student, and they don't have the same time to be able to really unpack and reflect on what that student's story has been. And so that's why I think students need to be careful about what they are sharing in this space. So in terms of advice, I think whenever you are raising a particular challenge that you've had, you want to be able to provide the solution to that challenge alongside the challenge itself. So if you were afflicted by a particular difficulty early in high school and you found something that helped you to solve that problem and you're in better straits now, great. You should find a way to share that thing. And you can ask a question that is then answered by the content that you share. One important thing to understand, and I think that it goes to the first sentence of this question, which is, issues that affect grades and rigor choices. If you have something that is affecting your ability to get the kind of grades you'd like to get or to take the classes you'd like to take, and that's something that will go with you to college, you're going to struggle with rigor choices and grades when you get to college as well, right? And so while there is an explanation for that challenge, that explanation doesn't mitigate the concern of lower rigor and less compelling grades. And so that's ultimately still what the college is looking at, is if you've got a bunch of C's, even if it's because of an ADHD diagnosis, if you haven't found the solution, that means you'll be getting C's in college more than likely. And so I think that's what the college drills into, is we expect C's regardless of the explanation. And so that's something that we're concerned about. So it's a tough question. It's really, really hard, I think, to explore, but colleges and admission officers do protect their institutions and want to be in a position where they are admitting students that are going to graduate. And so when they see flags, they might hesitate on a student, and you want to be careful not to raise those flags unless you can explain them. Did I miss anything, Shannon, there? I mean, this is a tough thing to explore, and I think hard, but what's your take on any of this?
No, I think that it makes perfect sense, and it doesn't feel great, because you're right, as counselors when we're working, you want to be able to tell somebody, be yourself. And that's what you generally are saying. You want to convey to this college who you are.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't feel great to say, hold something back, but I think that your point is so well taken. I love the way you phrase it. Don't raise a question that you can't answer. Again, in the maybe 10 minutes that an admissions officer is looking at your application.
And I want to acknowledge that this really cuts against a lot of the advice that we just had in the last segment, where we were talking about students who are LGBTQ plus and just own your identity and be yourself. And I think that, these kinds of challenges, whether it's with depression or a learning disability, are part of who you are. And I don't want you to feel like you have to diminish that aspect of your experience and what you've learned and grown from it. But I also think you've got to be careful in terms of how that is received and the concern that an admission officer might have in terms of how it's going to affect your academic performance on that campus. So it's difficult.
Think your other point absolutely aligns with the be yourself. If your mental health challenge has led you to say, you know what, I am going to take a slightly less rigorous curriculum because I know that I will be healthier that way, that if that's going to continue into college, embrace that,
That's a great reminder.
Don't be perhaps applying to colleges that you think are going to be too rigorous for you, that's going to put you in an unhealthy place. So acknowledging that part of it's what you acknowledge to yourself, be yourself to yourself, but then understand.
Be fair to your future self too, right?
Yes.
Like the goal is not just to get in everywhere. It's to get into a place that you're going to be able to be successful. So that's actually a really great reminder that you don't want to put yourself in a position to bite off more than you can chew from the college that you're ultimately accepted to and attend. So it's tricky, and I think it's personalized, right? And so I think there's some questions there for students to engage with.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, we'll leave that there, and maybe we can explore that in a further conversation. I wanted to ask you a question. I know we've got some questions about college finance, but my perception as someone who's on the admission side of the desk is that the questions around financial aid and scholarships really tend to go down at this point in time, in the middle of the summer, right? So it's kind of like, well, we're already we've seen our financial aid package, or if my student's applying this fall, I don't have to think about the FAFSA right now. I'm not super worried about where they're going to apply because they haven't rounded out their college list. What are the things that families should be thinking about in the summer when some of those big questions aren't quite as salient, but there might still be a way to help put themselves in good position financially coming into either the first year of college or the application season for seniors?
Yeah, in terms of those graduating seniors, now rising college freshmen, it's actually a lot to do. You wish you were all done now, but guess what's coming probably in the next couple of weeks? That first college tuition bill.
The bill, yeah.
So hopefully you've been, and I'm sure our listeners, the listeners of this show, are feeling very well prepared for that first tuition bill. If you've kind of had your head in the sand for a little while now, you're going to get a reality flash very quickly because those bills are going to be due in August. So right now there's, if you're borrowing any student loans, there's loan paperwork to fill out. If you're going to be signing up for a monthly tuition payment plan, which is a great thing to do and kind of an underutilized resource, that's something to look into right now. It allows you to stretch out rather than sort of two big giant tuition bills that you pay twice a year. You can stretch it out on a monthly basis. So that makes things a lot more feasible for a lot of folks. So keep an eye out for that bill, get the loans in place, get tuition payment plans in place. Take a look at if you've got a 529 college savings plan, take a look at the withdrawal procedure for that. But there's lots of paperwork steps, I would say, for families of rising college freshmen. For rising seniors in high school, I think now is the time to, and their parents, really take a look at what your financial situation is. If you haven't been having conversations about this all along, now's the time to get real about it, as rising seniors are finalizing their college list, deciding where to apply, thinking about what kind of resources you have available for college. Make sure your student knows what you have available to college and that it's not a blank check if it is not.
Yeah.
So they can take that under consideration as they're deciding where to apply. Make sure everybody's on the same page with that, understand that you need to have a well-balanced college list, both for admissions purposes and your chances of getting in, but also for financial purposes. You likely want to have some safety schools on that list where you look quite good. That's where you're likely to see the biggest scholarship offers. Right. Understand the real reach schools on your list. You may qualify for need-based financial aid, but if not, you're not likely to receive scholarship discounts from a real reach school where they're not bending over backwards to recruit you. So just make sure you have that nice balance on your list, and you should have some nice choices in the end to be able to choose from. But now's the time to sort of set that stage, make sure everyone's on the same page, that you got some choices in front of you and everyone understands what's going to feed into making that final decision.
That's great. Great advice. Some things for everyone to think about. Always thinking about finances. That's why we keep Shannon around and her whole team of experts, because they're like, hey, I know you don't want to talk about this, but it's coming. We got to do it.
Exactly.
I think we have time to tackle that question from Patricia. If you want to read that one, we get some time before we go to a break.
Yes. Patricia asks, can we please discuss concealed carry on college campuses? I'd like to hear from representatives from colleges that do or don't ban the carrying of a concealed weapon on a college campus. Should prospective students consider gun policies when making their college list? Thank you.
Yeah, tough question. I mean, I think we, the scope of this podcast, if we're going to have like an admissions dean on the call to talk about these kinds of policies are really outside of their hands. If you look at a lot of the schools, let's say in Texas or in Colorado and Oregon, you pointed out Oregon's a state that allows concealed carry on college campuses. It's not really something that's within the control of individual department heads on these colleges, but more often goes to the state legislature and some of the decisions that they want to make. So can we please talk about concealed carry? I told you, Shannon, I might rant. I'm going to try not to do that. What I would say is I think it's really important. Families have often asked the question about safety when they think about where they're going to send their kids. And that has to do with sometimes neighborhoods that they're looking at. Sometimes it has to do with how far from home they are and how quickly they can get home in an emergency. This is obviously a really important thing for people to think about. And I think it's an important question to ask. So when you are thinking about where to send your students, you might look at those states that allow that concealed carry. I would also say you be cautious of painting with broad brushstrokes, right? So Oregon is definitely a state that has a very conservative population outside of the metro areas, but Portland and Eugene, where the University of Oregon is, and Reed is in Portland, Oregon, is extremely progressive. You're probably not going to find students carrying guns on the Reed College campus, even if it is legal in Oregon. And so you have to kind of understand some aspects of the neighborhood in which each college is situated and aspects of those communities as well, because, Reed College is not the same as, let's say, Southern Oregon University might be. So that's something to look into. I also think there are opportunities for students as they go to these college campuses to make noise, right? To be active. When you are a student in a new state at a college campus, you are now a resident of that state. In some respects, you might register to vote there. And so you have an opportunity to rattle those cages and talk to your state representatives and try and change some of those policies if you feel like they don't serve your safety and serve the safety of the other students that you're in school with. So I'm hopeful that there will continue to be big conversations that are happening, and that students are a big part of what's pushing this. It's one of the things that has been somewhat heartening, Shannon, is you see a lot of these high school kids who unfortunately have been a part of these devastating experiences who are now really pushing to be advocates for common sense when it comes to laws. So
absolutely.
We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll see if I still have a job. No, we are going to take a quick break. We'll come back with some more questions on admissions and financial aid. Don't go away.